So tonight we're talking about allergies. So I usually do by a show of hands. Anybody dealing with allergies here? Yeah, okay, perfect. So now let's talk a little bit about them, right? So definition of allergies, what are allergies? So we'll make it real simple. It's a chronic condition involving an abnormal reaction to an ordinarily harmless substance called an allergen, okay? So pretty much any protein that comes in from outside of your body that your body recognizes as foreign, that you would normally not have to mount a response against it because it won't harm you, but all of a sudden, for some reason, we're going to talk about those reasons, that your body actually will start to mount those immune responses to them, okay? So allergens include, but are not limited to, aeroallergens, so like things that are in the atmosphere, tree pollen. Outside our office, you see all like the little like wind, like all those little pollens just roaming around. It looks like you're in snow. Pet hair, right? So going into a house, I have a friend that he goes into, if any like cats is like really super allergic to cats, and if he goes into a room with them, he can't even stand it for any large period of time. Food allergens such as milk, eggs, soy, wheat, nuts, fish. You can have food allergies to all kinds of things. We're going to talk about why those actually come up in the body, especially if you're not born with it, and how you develop them over time. We'll talk about that. But allergens or allergies are not new, right? They're something that have been around for a very long time. But normally these things shouldn't, like that, a reaction to something is a normal response, right? So if your body's mounting an immune response against something that it actually should amount it to, is a good thing. The problem is when it does it against things that it's not supposed to mount it against, right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So how the symptoms, the symptoms of how they're produced, right? Things like itching, sneezy, stuffy nose, runny nose, teary eyes, dark circles under the eyes, the food allergies, all those are the symptoms that are produced. How are those symptoms produced? What ends up happening is your immune system views an allergen as an invader and produces what's called your IgE antibodies. So we're going to talk a little bit about what they look like here, which stimulates histamine to be released. So this is an example here. So you have your immune cell, an allergen, so pick your favorite allergen, your cat dander or whatever, comes and attaches to that site on the immune cell. That then produces a bunch of different antibodies, okay? So antibodies are what go in and they recognize problems in the body, and your body, it's almost like a tag. It tags the allergen, and then your immune cells, particularly like mast cells, it's a different type of cell, comes in, it recognizes that tag protein, and then it mounts an immune response. So it actually releases a bunch of histamines. Those histamines cause more, like what's called phagocytes and all these things to come into the area, in other words, to destroy whatever that allergen was, okay? That's how that reaction occurs. So, but at first it has to see it, then it'll continue to mount immune responses to it. That's how those symptoms are produced. The histamine release is what actually produces those things.
So, well, just for curious,
yes.
This itchy eyes and runny nose and all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's because of our immune system.
Exactly. It's the immune system releasing the histamines into the body, and those histamines are what trigger those itchy eyes and sneezing and stuffy nose and those kind of like the production of all those kind of symptoms. So that's how it actually is created. Now, who is affected by allergies in this world, right? 1 in 5 Americans, so that's 50 million. Now, the interesting thing is the prevalence over time, right? Rates have tripled in the last 20 years, okay? Tripled. So what I like to think about is, okay, so if things are tripling in 20 years, have our genetics changed that much in 20 years to where, a prevalence of something is going to go up by triple? The answer is no, right? Our genes haven't changed that much. They don't change that much in a short period of time. So what is, and also if you look at different statistic, 5% to 40% of the population in America within like the last 100 years. Now that's a huge, huge jump, right? So what's happening? It's an environmental, right? Something's happening within our environment that's actually creating it. And we're going to talk about all the different types of triggers that have caused our bodies to start mounting more of these immune responses. Now, this is responsible for 4 million work days lost every year. So that's a lot of time. 30,000 hospital visits per year for food allergies alone. That's not including all the other types of allergies that we have. And then this is a huge statistic, $20.9 billion in costs for allergies alone in America. So this is, obviously, it has a big role and a big effect on our society. And unfortunately, unfortunately, it's caused by things that most likely we can control. And so we're going to talk about what some of those things are, right? Hope I hooked you. All right. Now, vitalism. So I just want a quick idea about how the body is supposed to heal. Vitalism is pretty much a principle that there's what's called an innate intelligence inside of our body, which allows it to heal and maintain its existence. Right. So if let's say you get cut. This is my good example. Right. You get cut. You put a Band-Aid over it. Your body then heals. Right. It does the healing. You don't have to sit there and think about it. It just does it automatically, right? So if you cut a steak, however, a non-living organism, right, will it heal? No, it'll sit there forever, right? So that's just the idea and the concept behind it. Now, I want to actually go to the next slide here. So this is come on in. Hello, welcome.
Hello.
Have a seat, sir. So this is a reaction of the body, or just a diagram of the body, right? So we have things that are good for the body, right, and things that are bad for the body on the other side, right? This is very simple, very very simplistic, but it's gonna illustrate the point. Your body needs a certain amount of things that are good for it, and then your body needs a certain amount that doesn't need a certain amount of things that are bad for it, right? So I'm not going to go into, we're going to go into a lot of these things that are good for it a little bit later. We're going to talk about all the different types of chemical, physical, and emotional stresses that can create allergies specifically. But this is the idea, right? If you have a lot of these things that are toxic to your body, it can create stress responses in the body. And we're going to talk about what happens with the stress response. If you don't have the right nutrients inside of your body, guess what? It can't heal the way that it's supposed to. So this is a really general and simplistic way of seeing it, but this is how any disease that we're talking about, so we could label it allergies, we could label it diabetes or whatever. There's a combination of physical stresses, chemical stresses, or emotional stresses, in other words, toxicities or deficiencies in the body that are creating those symptoms. Does this make sense? Okay. So if we look at this, I got to do a lot of clicking here. So this is the stress response. So in general, we talked about all these stressors. We have physical stresses, chemical stresses, and emotional stresses that create things. Our body, when it perceives these stresses, this is what happens in the stress response. You've got increased cortisol. One of the big things I want you to notice here is increased histamines, okay? So this is what I was talking about. When your body releases these histamines, that's when you get those itchy, runny nose, all that swelling stuff that we were talking about earlier. The other one that I want to mention particularly is decreased cellular immunity. So cellular immunity, when we decrease it, your immune system is what's responsible for either recognizing a foreign protein and saying that's okay, or recognizing that foreign protein and saying that we need to destroy that, right? So if your body's under a lot of stress, guess what? That foreign protein that you normally would have no problem with, it automatically, it's like, oh well, I need to have a problem with that now, right? So I gave the example earlier there that let's say you have people that are on guard for an army, right? And if they saw a bird flying by and they started shooting at the bird, that would probably be a bad idea, right? That would create some chaos in the area, right? So that's your body. That's an example of recognize something that's generally harmless and mounting an attack against it. Okay. The same thing happens inside of our body when you're stressed out. Your body can make these kind of mistakes. Does that make sense? So now, if we're looking at this, We talked about the three types of stresses: physical, chemical, and emotional. We're going to go into that. Now, allergies are not actually the disease, but a symptom of adaptation which should be addressed to return homeostatic cell function. Okay. Now, let's talk about some of the physical stresses. One type of physical stress is being overweight. Okay. So this is a study that was done, 4,000 children aged 2 to 19. They compared IgE levels, right? So we talked about how IgE is what's responsible, particularly with food, with not food allergies in particular, but with like the rhinitis or like runny nose, those kind of things. If you have the IgE level responses, so they did 2 to 19 years old compared to IgE levels, an indicator of allergic activity, which you talked about, with obesity levels. They found that children suffering from obesity had a higher IgE levels, right? In fact, obese children were 26% more likely to have some form of an allergy than people of normal weight, right? Pretty simple, right? We know that if you have a physical stress, as in being overweight, that can actually trigger the immune system or a stress response inside of the body. Okay. Researchers in Finland looked at how lifestyle factors, including obesity, may be connected to adult onset asthma. Okay. Now, asthma is related to allergies, right? So a lot of people, when they get an allergy, it produces an asthma attack after that. Okay. So they're heavily related. Now, their study followed more than 10,000 adult twins. Why is that the twin part important? Their genetics are the same, right? So if you have, I'm not sure in this study if they were genetically identical or if they were just fraternal, but a lot of their genetics were almost the same, right? So 10,000 adult twins free of asthma when the study started, and then they studied them for 9 years. The researchers found that adults who became obese had a higher rate of asthma than those who maintained a normal weight. The study also showed that a lack of physical activity increased asthma risk, right? So if they became overweight and they also weren't working out, guess what? More asthma, right? So again, this is just one of the physical stresses. We're going to talk, real simple, we could talk about a solution for this. Eat right, exercise. Those are the main ones for making sure. So if not being physically active is a problem for this, guess what? There's a solution. So you know the problem, you can almost always generate the solution right there, right? So we talked about physical inactivity. We're going to go a little bit more into it. Here's another study. So we analyzed the data of a cohort of children aged 5 to 14 years who were followed up. So they studied them from 92 to 2005, okay? And then their parents reported so there's 2,429, pretty much they were saying how active these kids were, okay? So the follow-up, a total of 1,703 children were reapproached at least once during a follow-up. Logistic regression models were applied, so pretty much they just found out. They studied the association between hay fever, allergic sensitization, and physical activity. Adjusted for potential relevant co-founders such as age, gender, study. Well, okay, we just talked about that. But pretty much the results came down to higher rates of hay fever were seen for inactive children, right? So 2.39% adjusted odds ratio. What that means is very likely associated with physical inactivity. So the less physical more allergies, more hay fever, right? So this is a very simple thing now. So in addition, the relative risk of incident cases of hay fever increased depending upon inactivity level. So pretty much varying degrees of inactivity created varying degrees of allergies. So it was correlated almost exactly. Another physical stress we could talk about, subluxation, right? So subluxation is what happens when two bones that are supposed to be aligned properly to allow proper nerve flow get misaligned, right? So if those bones misalign, and the reasons that those things can get misaligned, you guys all pretty much know this by now. If you get, 4 physical stresses, chemical stresses, and emotional stresses can actually cause this too. When this gets out of alignment, it puts pressure on the nervous system, and we all know what the nervous system controls, right? Everything, right? Including one of the biggest things that most people don't think about, their immune responses, right? So if your immune system is not reacting is not under the proper control of your nervous system, guess what? You can react to things that you're not supposed to react to, right? Does that make sense? So real simple solution for that we could talk about. Make sure your nervous system is working properly through chiropractic care, right? So just some examples of this, right? So having an improper neck curvature, that's a stress on the system, right? Just having that, getting proper curve correction, actually maintaining that proper curve will be less stress on the system, more better immune system function at that time, and more better nervous system and immune function. Okay, so we could give the same example for head tilt, things like that. Now we talked about physical stresses. Now let's switch on to chemical stresses and some of the things that cause allergies in this area, right? So we're going to go through the list. Some of the things we're going to talk about medications and vaccines here. Disclaimer: I cannot tell people to take vaccines, not to take vaccines, to take antibiotics or not to take antibiotics. Given my being a chiropractor, I don't prescribe medications or tell people to or not to take them. All I can tell you about is some of the risk factors that are associated with them. Does that make sense? So vaccines, antibiotics, and acetaminophen. Antibacterial products, we're going to talk a little bit about the hygiene theory we talked about here. Preservatives, low vitamin D, tobacco, alcohol, mold, excessive sugar, excessive caffeine, foods with high trans fats, and dehydration. So let's talk about just vaccines for a second. So this is a Nobel laureate. His name is Charles Rickett. He demonstrated over 100 years ago. So again, Nobel laureate, what that means is that he won a Nobel Prize, right? So he's a pretty well-renowned scientist. He found out that injecting a protein into animals or humans causes an immune system sensitization to that protein. What does that mean? Subsequent exposure to that protein can result in an allergic reaction or anaphylaxis. So big words, pretty much all it means is if a allergen or just some sort of protein gets injected into the bloodstream, your body mounts a response to it, and after subsequent or after that, you can get more sensitization or more immune responses to it. Okay, so including what's called anaphylaxis, and anaphylaxis is when you when you like swell up, right? That's called an anaphylactic response. You've heard of anaphylactic shock, where your body just swells up, and literally people can die from this, right? If they don't have the proper medications in that sense. Okay. Now here's a study on this: effects of DPT, so diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, tetanus vaccination on allergies and allergy-related respiratory symptoms among children and adolescents in the United States. So they found out the odds of having a history of asthma was twice as great among vaccinated subjects than among unvaccinated subjects. So they had a odds ratio of 2% with 95% confidence. The odds of having had any allergy-related respiratory symptom in the past 12 months was 63% greater amongst vaccinated subjects rather than the vaccinated subjects. Pretty much conclusion: DTP or tetanus vaccination appears to increase the risk of allergies and related respiratory symptoms in children and adolescents. So yes, we could talk about like the effectiveness of vaccinations for different things. I'm not even going to talk about all that tonight. But if we're trying to protect somebody against one thing and creating another problem, we gotta weigh the risk and benefits of those things. Does that make sense? Now, other things that are inside of vaccines that people have developed allergies to, right? So preservatives and other ingredients of vaccines. This was a study using gelatin, okay? So one of the ingredients inside of this gelatin product, or inside of the vaccine, was a gelatin. So what they found was, I'm just going to go straight into it. We evaluated 366 patient reports submitted from 1947 to 1997 that had adverse events. So in other words, they were given a vaccine and they had a reaction to it. So what they found out that mumps and rubella containing 0.2% gelatin as a stabilizer. On the basis of physician reports, the patients were categorized as to the nature of the adverse reaction. We determined the presence of IgE antibodies to gelatin. Okay, so that's the big takeaway here, right? They found out that those people that had those reactions actually had an IgE antibodies to that gelatin inside of their body. Conclusion: most anaphylactic reactions and some urticarial, which means just like redness and hives and things like that, reactions to gelatin containing measles, mumps, and rubella are associated with within DTaP vaccine may have a causal relationship to the development of this gelatin allergy. break it down. We know if there's gelatin inside of the vaccine, when you give it to somebody, on a subsequent exposure to gelatin, you can have a reaction to it using that same principle, right? The same thing can happen for peanut allergies, right? So we talked about peanuts and how much that is actually becoming a big thing for children nowadays. Like a lot of even the daycare schools and preschools, you can't actually have, like, you can't even bring food with peanuts into these places because so many kids are having reactions to it. That wasn't so much a big deal a long time ago. So what's happening? One of the ingredients as a stabilizer inside of vaccinations today is peanut oil. They use peanut oil inside of the vaccinations. So I think a lot of kids are actually developing these allergies because they're getting that subsequent exposure to that particular protein. Does that make sense? Cool. Now,
they found that out. Are they taking the peanut oil out?
I don't know if that's so common, or if they or even I don't know. I don't know that part, but I don't even know if they've even admitted that that's an actual relationship. But simple.
You're telling me it is.
Simple. I'm just saying we're looking at simple logic, right? And studies that were done on this stuff. That doesn't mean that it's always going to affect policy at a global level, right?
Yeah.
So and a lot of times things are slow to change, right?
Well, they don't want to admit they're wrong.
That's we can talk about that, right? So a good example of that was the mercury, right? Most people nowadays would agree that mercury is a pretty bad thing for your body. Okay, if you look at the Dental Association, they used to put it inside of the fillings, and I think some of them still do. They used to put it in the silver fillings that goes inside of people's mouths, right? They since switched that out, right? They no longer use the mercury in there, most of them, but the Dental Association said, oh, we're just changing it, or it's not a problem. The mercury is not a problem, okay? So they say that it's not a problem, but we're just going to stop doing that, right? So they did the same thing with vaccines. They took mercury out of vaccines, almost all of them, except for some flu shots, and some of them still have it in there. You have to make sure that the vaccines that you're getting, if you're going to do vaccines, doesn't have that inside of it, because guess what? That's probably not the best thing for your body. Does that make sense? So yeah, I don't know if they're changing the peanut oil out of there, but the principle is there, right? It doesn't really matter what they're going to be putting to it. You're bypassing normal responses that your body should naturally get, right? Your body should not be exposed to that peanut oil straight from outside to bloodstream. It's not a normal reaction for it. You're supposed to go through the digestive tract, or respiratory, like for most of these things that get into our body. We have those protective barriers in there for a reason, right? Not to bypass it straight into the bloodstream. Does that make sense? So let's keep going. So let's get that today. Microbiome and the hygiene theory. Okay, so let's talk about microbiome and the hygiene theory. So we talked about how, back up for a few slides here. So things like antibiotics, acetaminophen, antibacterial products, hyper-cleanly foods can be a problem. This is one of the reasons why, right? So I know you're aware of what a microbiome is. Are you familiar with what a microbiome is? So pretty much what it means is this is our little schematic here. Our body is literally covered in bacteria all over, right? So all over our skin, inside of our respiratory tracts, inside of our digestive tract. Bacteria is everywhere, okay? We can't avoid it. I think like 75% of the DNA matter of us is literally bacterial product, okay? So, and what we've developed over time is called a symbiotic relationship. What does that mean? Two organisms that have a similar goal in mind can live together and actually help one another, okay? There's all types of relationships, but symbiosis means that each one helps the other. What do the bacteria get? A place to live and a constant food source, right? We're going to keep on eating stuff, right? And then what do we get? So we get things like, like blocks areas on intestines that damaging bacteria can compete for, aiding digestion and breakdown of proteins, creates vitamin K, aids in absorption of different minerals. So in other words, bacteria is actually really good for us, right? There used to be this common misconception that, oh, bacteria is bad, right? That's actually not the case. What is bad, okay? What is bad is when one bacteria goes haywire and takes over the whole community, right? Or, in other words, they're not living in a good relationship with, a good community of bacteria. So you want to have a good, healthy community, right? Everybody's working together and creating, okay? So bacteria, good. We need it, okay? So what we've created in our society is this lack of bacteria, okay? We're not getting it as much. So we could talk about, I talked about earlier, the birthing process itself is being changed now, right? So when you go from the normal vaginal birth that's supposed to occur, when you go through the vaginal canal, you're actually being bathed in a lot of that bacteria that coming from the vaginal canal. That's one of the first exposures to bacteria that children get. Now, if we don't go through that, and we have things like cesarean, of course, some of them are needed, absolutely, 100%. But if you don't go through the vaginal canal and you're not exposed to those bacteria, your body's actually not exposed to all those healthy things that you could be getting with a good, healthy, what's called microbiome. Okay, so that can set you up for more problems down the road. There are things. So side note, if you do have a cesarean birth, it's good. You could actually swab the actual vaginal canal. They're doing this in a lot of hospitals now. They swab the vaginal canal and actually spread that over the child, so they're still exposed to those bacteria. Isn't that cool? So lack of exposure to bacteria and other infectious agents in childhood doesn't populate the gut microflora properly. So this is the old friends. In other words, old friends, those bacteria have been with us for a long time and we kind of need them. Okay, the symbiosis of bacteria and man. And our immune system is not challenged and developed properly. This also leads to a lack of immune tolerance. When we talk about immune tolerance, again, it's that bird example, right? Shooting the bird out of the sky, that would be bad tolerance. Okay, got it? So again, so like if you look at things like our food products, right? Highly hygienic, okay? So if you have a bag full of just produce inside of it, and it's sealed up, it will stay there fresh for a couple of weeks, right? But if you just leave it out on the counter, what happens to it? Start to wilt, right? Wilt and rot a lot faster, right? It's because it's covered in bacteria. But we've hygienized things. I just made up a word. We hyper-hygienize things, which makes it so that we're not exposed to as much bacteria as we normally should or are supposed to be. Okay. Now, how else? Oh, here's another example of hyperhygienicity, right? Have you seen, like, in almost every single store, there's these like pumps at the front of the places that the Purells and the antibiotic washes and the antibiotic like shampoos and all these other things. Now, again, are bacteria good for us? We need it. So if you're literally destroying all your bacteria every time you take a shower with these antibacterial soaps and stuff like that, what's going to end up happening to your skin? You're going to create problems with it. I had an old boss that used to use antibacterial soap all the time, and she started getting all the redness, and it's because her normal microflora isn't there. You need those bacteria inside your body to actually help you just exist. It helps your skin to have the right pH. It helps your digestive tract. Like, again, there's a lot of different functions for it. Now, what else can it do, right? So, I want to keep going on that right there, so I'm going to go back to that slide in just a second, but antibiotics, okay? So antibiotics, prescription, so this is a idea of how antibiotics can actually create food allergies in itself, right? So, and why is that? I guess I want to show you this slide. So things like leaky gut syndrome. Have you guys heard of that term? So leaky gut syndrome is where through like things like antibiotics or different chemicals, we're talking about glyphosate in a second, what ends up happening is these tight, the lining of the intestine is supposed to be these things with, it's called tight junctions, okay? So tight junctions are where the cells are literally right up against each other, and proteins aren't supposed to be able to really kind of get through that. Only specific things are supposed to be allowed through it, okay? What ends up happening with these things like glyphosate, antibiotic use, or things like that, that, what ends up happening is those junctions can actually get broken up. And when that happens, proteins that aren't normally supposed to be getting through actually start to get over and cross into the bloodstream. Now, when that happens, your body will obviously recognize those proteins and start announcing immune responses, because it's a foreign protein at that point that your body shouldn't be, that it shouldn't be in the bloodstream, okay? So your body will start to attack it. Now, if that's something like wheat, let's just use wheat for an example, right? So a lot of wheat products are sprayed with glyphosate. We're going to talk about that. Now, what ends up happening is that wheat product will get across that barrier. Your body will start to mount immune responses to it. So what ends up happening is, let's say something that you weren't intolerant to when you were a young kid or something like that, and you've developed it over time, you've developed an allergy to something. Has anybody known anybody with that has happened to them? They started developing allergies over time. This is one of the ways that actually happens. Is your body, these things are starting to get across it, and now your body's become sensitized to it. Okay, so that is the process of how this actually occurs. Now, things that do it, right? Antibiotics. So we're talking about antibiotics and food allergies and asthma. So a total of 1,504 cases and 5,995 controls were identified. Receipt of an antibiotic prescription within the initial 12 months of life was associated with food allergy diagnosis in unadjusted and adjusted models. Compared to children with no antibiotic prescriptions, a linear increase in the odds ratio was seen with increasing antibiotic prescriptions. What does that mean? More antibiotic use that these children got, more food allergies they got because of that reaction, right? So because those cells will actually start to open up and create those food allergies. Strongest association was noted amongst recipients of cephalosporin and sulfonamide antibiotics. Now, acetaminophen. Let's talk about that. Now, why? Okay. By the way, our digestive system is really important for us. So if there's this thing called the blood-brain connection, or the gut-brain connection. So problems in the digestive system have been shown to cause a lot of different problems as far as like depressions and anxieties and things like that. There's a huge relationship to it. So it's really important that we keep this gut microbiome really healthy. Now, another toxin, right? So acetaminophen, associations between chronic acetaminophen exposure and allergic rhinitis in a rat model. Average number of allergic responses per animal was 13.2 in the acetaminophen group versus 6.2 in the control group. All the rats in the acetaminophen group, 100% had mast cell infiltrating the lamina propria of the inferior turbinate. Okay, those are all big words, but I'm going to go over what that means. Whereas mast cells were detected in only 40% of the animals in the control group. What did that mean? If you took acetaminophen in this with the rats, they looked at their noses pretty much. Okay, so they looked at their noses and they were seeing if there were mast cells in their noses, like in their sinuses, versus not taking acetaminophen. What they found out was there was more mast cell activity in their nose, so in other words, more allergic reactions, allergic responses happening with acetaminophen. I didn't get the mechanism of this, I'm sorry, but it's just one of those toxins that I thought would be important to talk about, because a lot of people use this on an everyday basis, right? And they're not even aware that it might be causing allergies for them. So another one we can talk about real quick, genetically modified organisms, so in other words, non-organic products. Long-term toxicology study on pigs fed a combined genetically modified soy and genetically modified maize diet. So the GM diet, or genetically modified diet, was associated with gastric and uterine differences in pigs. GM-fed pigs had uteri that were 25% heavier than non-genetically modified pigs. Genetically modified pigs had a higher rate of severe stomach inflammation, with a rate of 32% of the genetically modified pigs compared to 12% of the non-genetically modified pigs. And there's some pictures here that are just kind of dictating that. So if you look here, this one here, this was non-genetically modified, so you can see it was just it was pretty, it was smaller. I believe it was smaller and less inflamed. Okay, pretty much an example. Whereas this one, this was actually non-genetically modified. These were the two genetically modified ones. You can see it was more red, more inflamed, more issues with it. So that's just a visual description of it. going back to what I was saying about glyphosate. So glyphosate punches holes in the gut lining, known carcinogen, and disrupts the gut bacteria. So this is over time the amount of celiac incidence. So what does that mean? Like celiac gluten sensitivities, things like that, or just like celiac disease, which means a highly allergic response to gluten, okay? And glyphosate on wheat, okay? So the amount of glyphosate that they were spraying on the wheat. Again, we can't say correlation equals causation, but just look at the graph here, right? So obviously, the more they were spraying this stuff on the wheat, the more incidences of these celiac events were happening, right? Is it the only cause? Probably not, but is it a big one?
Contributing.
Yeah, contributing factor. I would say yes. Again.
It's like between 9 and 10, though, it went down considerably.
Yeah, I don't really know what happened there, but yeah, that's the issue there. Here's another deficiency, right? So we talked about toxicity and deficiency. One of the deficiencies that can happen is vitamin D deficiency. Super, super important and super huge. I think the statistics on this are like 85 to 90% of Americans have a vitamin D deficiency. So just look around. Why is that? We're not getting enough sunlight exposure. That's the main one, because that's where most of the vitamin D is actually created. Okay. Now this was a study, right? The impact of vitamin D deficiency on asthma, allergic rhinitis, and wheezing in children. So just a study of family community medicine. The proportion of severe vitamin D deficiency was significantly higher in children and with wheezing, allergic rhinitis, and asthma than in healthy children. Exposure to the sun was significantly less in vitamin D deficient children, obviously, with asthma, allergic rhinitis, and wheezing than in controls. So pretty simple, right? Less vitamin D you get, more allergies, right? Why is that? Because vitamin D is hugely responsible for immune function. So if your body is lacking in vitamin D, your immune system is just not going to be functioning at an ideal level. You're going to get these problems where your body is attacking things that it's not supposed to attack. Okay. So again, give it what it needs. Some obvious stuff here you might not be familiar with, but cigarette smoking is just another toxin we could talk about. In the study, we show that mainstream cigarette smoke temporarily disrupts the normal lung homeostatic tolerance to innocuous inhaled allergens, thereby inducing primary allergic sensitization. So again, you're putting these things, these toxins in your body. It can create these problems. Alcohol as well. So we could even talk a little bit about this, but I want to make sure. I think we only have a little bit of time left. So alcohol is another toxin that we could talk about here. So I'm not even going to go into all that, because I want to get into some of the solutions that we could talk about, because we have one more thing here: thoughts. So this is an interesting concept. Your thoughts can actually decrease your immune system function as well, right? So starting in utero, stress may influence the programming of brain neurotransmitter systems, sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system functioning, and the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which in turn alters neural regulation of immune function. Pretty much what it means is, if you have stressed out thoughts and you're chronically stressed or worried about something, that's going to alter your immune response even in utero. So the idea of having a very calm and relaxed pregnancy is actually pretty important when it comes to this, right? Providing your child, and so if you're a husband out there, making sure that you're supporting your wife and calming and making sure that it's a nice relaxed environment can actually be very good for your child when it comes out. Okay, so traditional medical approach to allergies, really good for helping symptoms, right? But never truly addressing causes. So things like Benadryl, long-term use leads to dementia, short-term memory loss, or addiction. Other side effects include nausea, faster heart rate, anxiety, dry mouth. So this is actually a problem, right? Zyrtec can create dizziness, dry mouth, nausea, constipation, tired feelings, and could provide temporary relief. Again, never really truly addressing the underlying problem. Yes, if you're having that like super big one, maybe allergic response, maybe take that once, but try to figure out what the cause is, and let's talk about some solutions, right? So long-term use, not the idea. here are some simple solutions. I want to get into this, right? So breathing techniques, stress reduction. So this is going into like addressing the emotional stresses, right? So breathing techniques and stress reduction. We'll go through a couple of those. Adjustments, we talked about that. Getting outside and getting dirty regularly. There we go. We talked about supporting a healthy microbiome. So getting outside, getting into nature, playing with the dirt, that's actually really good. I'm going to be doing a Spartan race this weekend, which is going to be kind of fun. I'm going to get pretty dirty on that one. Home, up in Big Bear on the slopes. Home air purification. So this is particularly to help with mold toxins, okay? So things like Molecule and Homebiotic are good at-home air purification systems that you could use. Science-based nutrition, we'll talk a little bit about that, what that is a little bit later. Dietary supplements is associated with this, but we're going to just go with specific ones that you can start using particularly for allergies. Essential oils, same thing. Probiotic foods. Let's talk a little bit about probiotic foods. How can you get probiotic foods? You can get it through fermented vegetables, right? So fermented vegetables and fruits. I looked this up a little while ago. You could actually ferment fruits, vegetables. You could ferment flours. You could ferment a lot of different things. Pretty much you put water, you get whatever that is, put some water on it, seal up the jar, and not all the way because it actually can explode. You don't want that. And you put it in a cool, dry place for like 4 to 5 days, and the natural bacteria in the environment will actually start to ferment that vegetable or ferment that stuff. You could also look at, like, they also have them, they sell them at your like Whole Foods and Mother's Markets and things like that. That's the best source for dietary probiotic foods. Yogurts, another good example. Kimchi, kombucha, those kinds of things are really good for you. Detoxification of your household. I give you a handout there. It says detoxify your life checklist. That's a really good some simple solutions. Exercise. Recommendation for this, 5 to 10 minutes. 10 minutes minimal, 3 to 6 times a week. And usually you want to do something that's going to be it's going to be hard for you to talk to the person next to you. Does that make sense? You want to be like easily talking to the person for 10 minutes and then that's your exercise. No, you got to be like huffing and puffing, right? Make sense?
Not social time.
Yeah, it's not social time. It's time to work. Yep. Maintain a healthy weight. We talked about that. Here's another simple one. Apple cider vinegar has actually been really has been proven to help allergy responses. Things like local honey and bee pollen. So what happens with this, right? So the way that the idea is, local bees go around, especially if you're dealing with pollen allergies and things like that. The local bees will go out and they will they'll be exposed to all the different pollen and stuff like that, and then you'll expose that, and it's almost like a homeopathic remedy that you're getting by getting exposed to that. It also has antiviral and antimicrobial factors, the Manuka honey. Okay, neti pot saline sprays. So like if you have a lot of these like allergens that are inside of your sinus cavities, going in there and flushing that stuff out can actually help to drastically reduce these allergy symptoms that you might be getting. Okay, so really simple solutions. So that's a picture of a neti pot right there. Put the water in and goes up one nostril and out the other, so it clears out the sinuses there. I put adjustments right there. They actually sell, here's another interesting thing, they sell probiotics for your home. It's called Homebiotic. It's a bacterial colony that you could spray inside your house that actually fights mold, right? Pretty cool. So just an interesting little plug there. Meditation. This is my meditating doggy here. So meditation doesn't have to be anything grandiose, just really simple techniques that you could do. Things like just closing your eyes, taking deep breaths through the nose and out through the mouth can actually be really good for de-stressing your your mind, right? You could do guided, or somebody's helping you out, or just do it all by yourself. There's all different ways to do it. You could be focusing on like flames. There's all kinds of different meditations you could do. Have you guys seen that one where you stare at a flame for a while? Have you ever like looked at fire and felt like you're getting into a trance? Mm-hmm. That's actually really meditative for you, actually getting into it. It's kind of fun. Diaphragmatic breathing. Things like just taking a nice deep breath in. you guys can try it out. So sit up, put your hands on your stomach, and what you do is you breathe in through the nose. You try to breathe in for about 10 seconds. So if you can do that, if you can't, that's okay. And then you breathe out through the mouth. Really simple. Do that, you're actually increasing the parasympathetic nervous system, helping you relax. Okay.
That's what they stress in the yoga classes with the
Very good, yeah.
breathing. Yeah.
Super important, super important. Things to eat, right? So let's go into some of the foods that we could be eating. Well, first of all, I want to start with water, okay? So sometimes I think about like an immune response or an allergic response, almost like a fire in your body, right? Or it's the same thing with inflammation. I think about the same way. You're looking at like a lot of inflammation happening in the body. What I like to do is pour water on the fire, right? So if you're not drinking enough water, their cells aren't going to function the way they're supposed to, just period. So what we want to do is get half your body weight in ounces every single day. And of course, you want to make it purified water. You want to make it like good, clean water. Because if you're getting things like your tap water, that's just another source of toxins that you could be exposed to. Mediterranean diet. So this is a sample of what a Mediterranean diet actually might look like, right? Looking at lots of green vegetables, lots of healthy fats, minimizing the amount of trans fats like we talked about earlier. Another good diet you can look at is ketogenic diet, right? So ketogenic, lots of healthy fats, super good for you. Anti-inflammatory diet, it's another one. I'm not going to go into all of these diets right now, but these are some ones you might want to look into. They found out that breast milk in childhood is actually really good for limiting the amount of allergies that kids get, right? Because it helps to support a strong, healthy immune system in the child, right? So very important that kids actually get breastfed because it helps the immune system develop. High potassium foods. We talked about apple cider vinegar, right? Also helps support a good healthy microbiome because it has bacteria inside of it. It's good for you. Dark chocolate, I like to throw that in there. And then what I like to do for, like, let's say you might have let's say you're eating a certain food that you're being constantly triggered by, find out what that is by doing what's called an elimination diet. All that means is the main triggers are things like, again, gluten, but like we talked about earlier, it might not be the gluten, it might be what they're spraying on the gluten, so make sure it's like the glyphosate, so make sure it's a healthy organic version. And then you could try things like getting rid of the gluten to see what happens, right? Try it for like a month, and you could reintroduce it later and see if your allergies start to go away. I had a patient that was coming in, we had a lot of different skin reactions and things like that. I told her to minimize or get rid of gluten for a month and see what happens. All those reactions started going away. So what happens? That could be one of the reasons that you're getting these allergies. So it's something to look at, right? So gluten, dairy is another big one that people have responses to. So just good to look at that. Here's some supplements that are specific for allergies that have been proven to be very helpful. So things like stinging nettle is one of the really big ones. And how do you take these supplements? You could take them. Well, all of the examples are on here. 200 milligrams 3 times a day. Try Ease. That's actually a supplement that doTERRA makes, and you can get that from our office if you want it. Lemon peel. These are all just different oils too. Lavender flower, peppermint plant, vitamin D, quercetin, butterbur, astragalus, bromelain, N-acetylcysteine, omega-3s. So that's like fish oils or pure form oil, which is a vegan version of oils that are healthy for your body. Vitamin C, really good for supporting antioxidation and immune system function. Or local honey we talked about. Okay. So those are all the really good supplements that you can start taking. I mean, you can start with one and start increasing as you go along and just see if, like, little by little, right? Or you could just throw the whole thing at it, right? Essential oils, more great essential oils. So things like frankincense, eucalyptus, basil, lemon, tea tree oil, right? So the way that you could do these, you could actually just get the drops, put them on your skin, rub them into the different pressure points on your body, or you can diffuse them in oils inside your house, right? So again, that's just another, and it also has a really good cleansing and effect on your house in general. Okay. If you are curious, what we do here in our office, or what we're rolling out within the next month here, is a program called Science-Based Nutrition. Pretty much what it means is we are able to do, so instead of trying to guess on figuring out what your body, we talked about chemical toxicities and deficiencies in your body, instead of trying to guess like what kind of things I'm deficient in, or what kind of chemicals or what kind of things like heavy metals that I might have in my body that's creating these problems, what we're able to do is do blood work, urinalysis, hair sampling, things like that, and we're actually able to find out exactly specifically which nutrients your body is deficient in, or what kind of toxicities that you might have in your body that's creating the problems. So what that report would actually look like is here's just an example of it. So we have, this would be a hair sample that was taken, so it shows us the different metals and things like that were found in the sample, different essential elements that are actually really important for your body to have. So it shows, okay, this person was for aluminum, right? This person prior was high in aluminum. After doing detoxification and the proper supplementation regimen, you can see that those values go down. So again, we're not guessing here. We're actually being able to check pre and post and seeing if the stuff that we're giving to you is actually working for your body. Does that make sense? So that's what we're able to do inside the office now, which actually could make big differences for people. Now, a simple example for this, like, so let's say vitamin D, real simple one. So you do the blood test on somebody, you find out that person is actually deficient in vitamin D, which we talked about earlier, can be the why you're having allergies, right? So you look at this, you say, okay, you're deficient in vitamin D. What would be the recommendation? Guess what? Vitamin D. You need vitamin D inside the body, so that's what we would recommend. You start taking it. It's usually once a day, a little capsule you take once a day. I'm taking that currently. And boom, you check it pre and post. You actually see that it's going up, and then you could actually, based upon that, we could change the amount of those supplements that you need to be taking going forward, right? So usually the first round of vitamins that we're actually able to produce for people look something like this. So that's something similar to what I'm taking right now. And next time you go in, you do another blood work, hopefully a lot of the values have evened out and you don't have to take as much going forward. Does that make sense? And you're only taking the ones that are specific for your body and what your body needs, so you're not guessing at this, okay? Make sense? Okay. Now, and like I said, so if you have questions about that, we do a free initial consultation about that program, and then go over there. Any questions?
So,
go ahead.
You talked somewhat about getting rid of allergies.
Yes.
Is there any, like my niece has peanut allergy.
Yes.
Quite severe. She's back in Minnesota. And what would be a good course of action for her? Is it eating different? Is she not overweight? She none of that? How could she kind of alleviate herself and, maybe over time this gets better?
So I would start with what we talked about here with addressing physical stresses, chemical stresses, and emotional stresses, right? So go through the list of, okay, so what kind of things physically might she be dealing with? Is she seeing a chiropractor? You said that she's not overweight. She's, okay. Look at vitamin levels, right? So you can find out actually what kind of nutrients that are in her body that she's maybe not getting, so her immune system's not responding properly. Is she vitamin D deficient? We don't know any of those things. Does she have heavy metals in her body that might be creating these issues as well? Right? There's all.
Well, no. Yeah. Is there a way? I mean, like I said, she's in Minnesota. Is there a website or is there information we can send her or her parents on?
She said she's in Minnesota?
Yeah.
Okay. So this program that I'm doing here can be done over internet. So we could talk a little bit more about that later if we want to set that up. Okay.
Okay.
You got a question?
No, I was going to make it a comment, that's all.
Okay. You can make it.
No, you talk about chiropractor, said when I think of chiropractor, it causes stress, coming to chiropractor.
Oh, of course, yeah. Well, it could cause you stress, yeah. Depending on how you look at it. Cool. All right, well, thank you guys so much for coming tonight. I appreciate it, and I will see you at your next adjustment.